Welcome back to another episode of the HIT podcast. My name is James Layton, CEO and founder of Anderson James. This is the podcast where we bring you real-life stories from some of the most interesting and inspirational leaders of our sector. Today, I was delighted to be joined by Nigel Banks, R&D Director at Ilke Homes. Nigel talks at length around net zero carbon, Ilke's ambitions to create zero bills across the country, their partnership with Octopus Energy, and what the future of the energy crisis looks like and what we can do to solve that across the housing sector. I hope you enjoy this episode, and if you do, I'd ask that you like and subscribe. Nigel, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, James. Great to be here.
Thanks for taking the time out. As I always like to start, and I never quite do it justice, but could you just give us an introduction to yourself and a little bit of an overview of where you're at now and what you're up to?
Yeah, no problem. So, Nigel Banks, I'm R&D Director at Ilke Homes. I've been in housing and construction for sort of 20 odd years now, and started off working at Oscar Faber, which was an engineering consultancy that grew into AECOM, which is now a global engineering consultancy, cost consultancy. And I started working on building regulations and sustainable buildings there. Got an engineering degree by background and chartered engineer. And some of the schemes I built or designed at AECOM got built out by Keepmoat, and I went and joined Keepmoat to help them transform their new build and then into their retrofit into the existing housing stock, and did a lot of work with solar PV in 2011 and 12 when the feed-in tariff was booming. A lot of work on solar wall insulation through 2013-14, and then when all the funding for that got cut in 2015 and zero carbon homes got chopped as well. Looked at where else Keepmoat could go, and one of the projects I led was a concept work on modular housing, and that from there Ilke was born. Had 6 months at NG, or maybe a year at NG, who acquired the Keepmoat regeneration business. So I had a bit of time working with them, which was interesting and linked into some of the energy stuff we've been doing on zero bills. So it's been a fairly linear career journey from sort of consultancy into mainstream consulting. Into mainstream contracting and house building, and then now into modular housing.
Amazing. And what was the ambition? I mean, did you fall into housing? Most people I have on the podcast fell into housing in some way, shape or form, or did you choose it? What was the journey in?
So I fell into engineering, I think. So a friend of a neighbour knew I was into sort of maths and engineering, sciencey stuff, and did a week's work experience at AECOM, or Oscar Faber it was back in 96, 97, I think it was. And I did a undergraduate placement with them and worked for university with them, and really got into it from there. And once you get into it, I think you can really see the interest. I left AECOM largely because I was working on massive international projects that I didn't feel were making much of a difference. And one of the reasons I went to Keepmoat was it was housing, and it was housing at scale, and that was what excited me around making more of a meaningful difference on the UK housing stock and on climate change and on builds. And so that was a conscious choice to move away from multi-billion-pound Middle East projects into how do you retrofit this 1930s semi to reduce people's bills and carbon footprint. So and do that at scale.
Yeah, and sustainability was a natural thing for you to fall into. But why do you think you took that path over kind of just going into mainstream housing? What was the sort of reason behind that, would you say?
I think there's a general, I think this is probably 15 years ago, it's probably less on everyone's agenda and everyone's radar. But for me, reading some books and watching things like Inconvenient Truth when it came out back then, those sort of things could start getting me interested. And the more and more I read, the more and more informed I became on it, the more and more I saw it as an issue. And I think that's becoming more mainstream, which is great. But I think a lot of people have been working in this space for a long time, and are probably frustrated at the speed of change. And that's one of the things that excited me originally around the Keepmoat business was the scale of change. And that's what excites me now mostly about Ilke around what we're doing is the disruptive nature of what we're doing, and how that can hopefully start to shift the whole industry to build into a higher standard. And that's what really excited me about what we're trying to do here, and the potential that has to ripple out across the industry, which is massively needed. And that's what I've always been seeking to try and do is lead the way and show what can be done, and then hopefully lots of people will come on that journey with us.
Yeah, I remember every time someone asks me about sustainability, your name's the first name that I think of. So to be honest, I've been looking forward to this. But in terms of Ilke, then, if we just talk about their business model, it's, I obviously work a lot with Ilke, but it's sustainability first. It feels like a really, really big part of the strategy, and it is a big part of the strategy. But what are the targets, and what did you set out to achieve when you first joined them? Was that a few years ago? When did you actually start?
So when we first did the original concept homes back in 2016, they were zero carbon, all electric, EV charging points, largely because I was in charge of design. So I got to put everything into it. And it was a concept home, it was a prototype, and it was trying to show what could be done. So from the very first homes we designed, when it was original Keepmoat Elliott JV, back in 2016, before Ilke was actually even a business, we had sustainability at the heart of what we were trying to do. We had a real conscious vision of trying to build a better home from the concept and do it in a better way. And those were the sort of founding visions of it. So we always set out from that from a starting point. We also knew the regulations were going to catch up, even though the regs got cut in 2015. We knew they would come back. So we set out from a starting point of we should have a very good fabric. We didn't go to passive house. Generally, on feedback from clients, they didn't want mechanical ventilation, heat recovery, and the filter changes every 6 months, and they didn't want the air tightness being so low that if people turned off ventilation, there would be issues. So we stepped a little bit back on the fabric, but kept a very high standard. Customers also then back sort of 5 years ago weren't particularly keen on heat pumps, and the cost of gas electricity, but it didn't make a lot of sense, and the regulations didn't really promote it either. But we had that always as an option, so people could always upgrade with solar PV, could always upgrade with heat pumps on the homes. And as a result of that, we've done 6 zero carbon sites already, which is probably more zero carbon sites than any other established business has done in the last 5 years. And we're now moving to really big sites that are 100 plus zero carbon homes, and that's the biggest that's been built for 10 years since the ones we did at Keepmoat in 2011-12 in Wakefield. So it's really been at the heart of what we've been trying to do. I think everyone in the business wants to be building more sustainable homes. It's a great thing to attract people to the business. A lot of people come in and do say they see what we're trying to do, and that's great. But it's also now what a lot of our clients wanting and are demanding, going beyond what the regulations say they have to do, and particularly the institutional investors who've got ESG money behind them saying we want you to be building more sustainable homes. That's really driving it, actually probably faster than housing associations. We thought the housing associations would be the first to go for zero carbon. It's actually been some of the institutional investors like Gresham House on the first site in Stamford Hove have said, do as many zero carbon homes as you can do on that site. And that's really driving us towards trying to achieve that.
Yeah, fun. And in terms of, because I was around and probably knew you back in here as well when Green Deal was around and there was the tariff funding and all the things that were going on back then, and it sort of lost momentum. We're not going to lose momentum this time round, are we? I feel like there's enough global influence now to say that this is here to stay and these targets aren't going to move, are they?
No, absolutely. It feels like it is here to stay. I think most of the big PLC house builders have got 2030 zero carbon targets. I think their shareholders are now driving them towards that. So I do think a lot of those longer term targets are now embedded in a lot of what businesses are trying to do. And I don't think there'll be as much to push back against it. Might be proven wrong. There was a big pushback in 2016 when the cost of those regulations were apparent. I think the timeline might slip a little bit, but I think fundamentally people know where the end goal is now. I think it's a legally binding obligation. I think people know that gas boilers are being outlawed in new builds in many other countries. I think Scotland's going to be ahead of the UK, so they'll be driving the supply chain first. Of course. So I think we are on a one-way destination. It's a question of how quickly we get there, and the quicker we get there, the better it's going to be. Around the globe.
Yeah, I agree. And when you talk about this, I was reading about the UK's largest zero carbon site. How do they measure that? Like, what is the measurements that they use to say that it's the largest zero carbon site in terms of the metrics you use to make it zero carbon?
So it's a point of probably confusion and debate around what it means. So there are lots of different definitions out there. So we talk about zero carbon being operational zero carbon. So when the house is in use, typically it's effectively generating as much as it's using, and the carbon emissions net out over the year to be zero in operation. There's still what's called upfront or embodied carbon in the structure itself, and that's one of the things we're doing a lot of work on to try and reduce as well. And And yeah, you can also, for example, in London, they use the same definition of zero carbon operational, but you can offset the last chunk of emissions by paying into a fund that reduces emissions elsewhere. We would get to zero carbon with the technologies on the house. That gives the most benefit to the end consumers who are moving into those homes. So you've got upfront embodied carbon, you've got operational carbon. It's very hard to get to zero it's almost impossible to get to zero embodied carbon. If you can get to negative on the operational, you can recoup some of that upfront embodied carbon. And our zero bills homes potentially do that over a 100-year life cycle. We've modeled that through, and we get to effectively generate enough negative emissions over time to offset the upfront emissions that we're putting in from the first time. It's probably quite complicated, but I think the other thing we've found is zero carbon probably is interesting to some people like me, but probably isn't a great end consumer proposition. And that was one of the real things to move to zero bills. I think with the cost of energy where it is today, it really is a much better end consumer proposition. It's something that people can say. People won't pay more for green generally, but they will pay more for something that's going to save them money. And if we can effectively almost guarantee a zero energy bill, when we announced it, that was worth £1,000 a year. This winter, the average bill is going to potentially get up to nearly £4,000 a year. So it's massive in terms of the impact. We couldn't really forecast that when we launched it, but I mean, clearly it's massive and really resonates with people at the moment. And the technology is there, we can do it probably easier than other house builders, but there's no reason why other house builders couldn't be building zero bill homes in the future as well. So the technologies are there; they're much more cost effective than they used to be, and we're hoping that this will break ground, that other people will start to follow in our footsteps and do the same as well.
Yeah, I agree, and I totally agree with your point on what's the proposition to the end user, right? So there's an education piece here, because people have different definitions, zero carbon, whatever the terminology is. But if I'm buying a new home, is that a benefit to me? You've got to show some cost savings, haven't you? You've got to be able to say that this is the reason. But how does that look from a manufacturing perspective in terms of, is it more expensive? Because I'm sure house builders aren't jumping on board, because I'm sure it's going to cost them more money to deliver a home that's energy efficient.
Yeah, so there are additional costs. Clearly, you've got solar panels you don't have to install yet in regulations. The new regulations are starting to push that. And you need to fit a heat pump, which is more expensive than a gas combi boiler. It is more expensive. There's a hot water cylinder, which actually costs more than the combi on its own, and then you've got the external unit. What we've done is we've redesigned our manufactured products to make the kit fit in much easier. So we've got now a cylinder cupboard by the front door, where you can either fit a gas boiler or you can fit the hot water cylinder. The rest of the house is identical. We've sized the radiators, the pipe work all around air source heat pumps, so it works really well. The solar PV fits in the roof, as do the batteries in the roof space. So again, we've designed that in to optimize that around the size of roof, the size of solar panels, to really make that fit in and look good, as well as really work well. So we use the solar panels in the roof rather than placed on top on a frame, which gets rid of all the concrete roof tiles. So that gets rid of some embodied carbon, and you are adding extra carbon by adding in the solar panels and the batteries. But that's solar panels and batteries that we need to install somewhere in the country over the next 10, 15 years to decarbonise the electricity grid. So that extra carbon is probably less important. But yeah, those technologies we've designed in such that they are easily manufacturable. So people on the shop floor building the homes just over to the left-hand side of where I am today, they're following the same process. They're putting the same pipework in the ground, putting the same radiators in, whether it's a zero carbon home or a standard home that we're building, or a zero bills home. For them, it's the same process through the production line, and that's really important that we've sort of demystified and de-skilled that approach through good design, and that's the first step of getting this to work really.
Yeah, and I was going to say, your role must be heavily involved in design, because you just said that it's easier for you to do than it is a house builder to do. But why is that? I mean, is it just easier to implement these things whilst it's going through a production line, or would it be the same on site, the process?
Fundamentally, the fundamentals are the same. It's the same technologies, it's the same principles. I think in a factory controlled environment with production lines and people carrying out the same tasks in a repeated process, it's easy to manage quality and make sure the insulation fully abuts and there isn't gaps in there. You haven't got rain coming in on the house you're building, trying to get the insulation to fit together. So it's an easier process to get the quality control right than you would get on a traditional building site. So some of those things are easier in a manufacturing environment from a quality control point of view. But the principles of design are the same. So it's ability to execute is probably is where the difference is. I think part of the challenges is everyone has designed houses around gas combi boilers for the last 10, 15 years. And they haven't got space for a hot water cylinder. They haven't thought about where the air source heat pump's going to go and the route that pipework needs to take. Where would the batteries go? Where does the cabling go? Where does the inverter go? Those things are things that once you've thought through a design and got into your base design, it's very straightforward. But for a lot of house builders, there's a step change they need to make. They're currently worrying about the step change in fabric regs that come through this year. And they're probably thinking the heat pump's for another 3 or 4 years away. So don't need to worry about that too much yet. But I think the more forward-thinking house builders are starting to do pilot sites and work this out, do some trials, and they'll learn, and then they'll move it forward. And I think it will then become the norm in the same way, the way that other things have become the norm.
Yeah. And how have you seen? I mean, you've been in sustainability for a long time from when I've known you. And how have you seen the technology evolve over that period? Is it evolving quicker and quicker as the years go on, or is it fairly stagnant at the moment, the technology?
No, it's continuing to race and race on. So, I mean, the key stat I always talk about is a solar panel 10 years ago cost 5 times as much and was half as efficient. Right. So it's now twice as efficient and a fifth of the price. So overall, it's 10 times cheaper per amount of energy you're getting out of it. And in 10 years, that's massive. And it's been following that curve for decades. The last 12 months has been a bit of a blip because the cost of everything, shipping and gas and electricity, everything's gone up. So there has been for the first time a bit of inflation in the cost of those materials, but they're getting much more efficient. They're getting much cheaper. The embodied carbon in the materials and the embodied energy materials are also getting a lot better. So even though people say there's a lot of embodied carbon in these materials you're putting, that yes, there was, but if you look at the most up-to-date stuff, most of the solar panel factories, not surprisingly, have got solar panels on their roofs, generating the power for powering the solar panel factories. And that's one of the things that is really accelerating. And then the heat pumps themselves, historically they had quite refrigerants that if the refrigerants leaked have a high global warming potential. The new ones are much lower, sort of thousands of times lower on global warming potential than refrigerants. And again, the performance of those is getting better. The real step change is on the ability to control and link that to the cost of energy. And that's how we've got to be able to get to zero bills. So it's the combination of the technology working with Octopus Energy, the energy supply partner, who can the cost of energy for most people is just it's a flat price through the day, but in reality the energy company is buying that and selling that every half an hour, and the cost of energy in the evening is actually 2 or 3 times the price of it is at night or in the day. So if you can buy in and heat up your hot water at night and then generate your energy from your solar panels and send it to the grid in the evening, you can completely change the economics and make things really work in your favor. And that's one of the things that Octopus has been one of the first to really get going with these agile and smart tariffs. And working with them, we've built a bespoke tariff that enables us to get to zero bills. And that's one of the really key things, that the technology to be able to control and optimize the technology is really what's the game changer in the last 18 months, really. So in those last 18 months, that's really been available, and that's really enabled us to leap forward and go from zero carbon to zero bills.
Yeah, and on the Octopus, I mean, it's hit the news massively in the last 3-4 weeks. What does that partnership mean for Ilke? What's it involve, and kind of how will that kick on? I know it'll take you on the journey to zero bills, but is there anything else in that partnership that's going to revolutionise the product and the way that you're doing things?
We had the vision and idea for zero bills 12 months ago, and in 12 months we've got the first zero bills homes on site at Stamford Hope with Gresham House's scheme at Hope Green, Essex. So we've seen what we can do in 12 months. Is great, and I think for me that's the start of the journey. And Octopus are a really interesting, exciting business that have got great people at the heart of it and great technology. And I think we've got a similar culture of bringing in great people and having great technology, and together a really open culture to looking at how best do we do the things that we want to do, and how best do they do the things that they want to do, and coming together to see how we can make things work. And the other thing that's interesting, exciting for me is Octopus is part of Octopus Energy, is part of the wider Octopus group, and they've got some other interesting parts of their business. They've got the investment sides that invest in solar farms and and wind farms, and they've also got a real estate business that invests and funds housing association development projects.
Yeah.
So there's a really interesting thing about where that can go. Really interested about what they're doing on electric vehicles as well. Using vehicles to be the battery for a community. There's loads of ideas that are going around my head, and
I bet
some of their R&D people, and have lots of exciting conversations. And what I think is exciting is they've got very much a can-do attitude, and that's an attitude that I think we embody as well, of working out how to make it happen and really going after it. There's not a huge amount of bureaucracy getting in the way. We've got the right people, the right decision makers in the room, and we can make things happen quickly. And that's great about being quite an agile business that's able to do that. And I think that's where we still are. And I think they're a similar business with similar aspirations. So yeah, I'm really excited about where that could go, and really see the zero bills as being the start of the journey.
Perfect. And on the octopus thing, you mentioned that solar panels have come on leaps and bounds, and you get more energy from them now than you did. I always think about this about my car. So I was quite early to adopt an electric car, and forgetting the infrastructure for a minute, I often think to myself, would I have been better waiting to buy an electric car now than what I did buy? Because obviously the ranges are longer and all that kind of thing. Are we going to run into the same thing? Because obviously housing associations have retrofitted with PV panels for 10 years now. Are they going to be in a situation where they're going to be replacing them in 10 years' time for more efficient ones, or not? Will there be a way to sort of fix them?
I mean, solar panels now have got to an efficiency point where they will keep getting better, but I think we're getting to sort of, they're not going to get twice as good in the next 10 years. They might get 20-30% better. What I think will change is they'll get more cost effective. There'll be cheaper, better ways of fitting them. Batteries are definitely on a massive downward trajectory curve over time. I think the next few years, because there's a shortage of batteries for electric vehicles, the price may stay fairly stable. But I think when you come to replace your batteries in 15 years' time, they'll probably be half, if not a quarter, of the price of the ones you fitted in the first place. And so I do think that with these things, I fitted batteries in my home 10 years ago, and in my new home 3 years afterwards. And did I regret it? I haven't regretted it. It was the best technology, the best kit we could get at the time. When I come to replace them in 10 years' time, I'll update with the best kit that's available when they need to. I think some of the things that getting better at are be able to recycle them better.
For sure.
And potentially reuse them, so that some of the car batteries that will come out of first generation cars will be turned into battery storage for the grid or for houses. So I think when they come to the end of their useful life in a car, they're probably still pretty useful for other uses for some time to come. So I'm a big believer in probably not buying the very first ones that come off the production line, but actually the ones that early on you're getting a good product ahead of everyone else. And I think people who bought probably a Tesla Model S probably 10 years ago, it's probably still worth almost the same thing as they bought it 10 years ago.
Probably, that's so true. And in terms of kind of the education piece, so you deliver your first zero bills home, and then is there more education in that moving process for a new tenant or a new home buyer to show them how to use the technology so that technology does deliver zero bills, or is it pretty self-sufficient and it does it itself?
So one of the key things that we were focused on is how do we make this a great end user proposition in terms of zero bills, but also in terms of how they manage the energy and control the energy. So effectively, the end user can use their house as they would do normally. They've got a thermostat. They can adjust the temperature and the timings on the thermostat as they would do normally. And there'll be a smartphone app to do the same thing on the temperature control. Effectively, then what happens in the background is the equipment we've installed will optimize the energy to suit their needs as best they can. So if they want to have hot water, that at certain points of the day, we'll work out when's the best time to do that, such that they've got hot water by 7 in the morning. They've got enough hot water to have the showers they want. So it might be that the hot water's been heated at 1 o'clock rather than at 6 o'clock. But by the time they wanted it, it's available and warm. If they say they want the house at a certain temperature by a certain time, there might be a half an hour spike in energy at 3 in the morning when the heat pump will be off, but the householder won't know that. Octopus have done that in the background to minimise the cost of energy, but still deliver the comfort that the end users asked for. So the smart stuff's in the background optimising. The batteries optimise by themselves pretty much. the heat pump we're looking to optimize a little bit to move around certain hot water demand and some of the heating potentially. But otherwise, it's fairly easy for the end user. There is some bit for me around how can we encourage people to further reduce their bills by putting the dishwasher on at night, because that would be better. It's fairly easy to do. Those are the sort of things we need to work with Octopus around. What's the nudges in behaviour? Even when they've got zero bill, that might push them to do the right thing from a more environmental point of view. It's lower carbon at night, so do you want to put your heat, run some of your equipment at night? But price signal is the best way of doing it. But on the zero bills, there isn't a price signal because it's zero.
Well, it's interesting. Octopus, I'm with Octopus for my car, and there's a better tariff if you charge a car at certain parts of the day. So clearly, they are nudging the right behaviours. But it's like what I'm observing with plastic. 10 years ago, no one was talking about plastic being a problem. Now, the whole behaviour shift's happening, isn't it? In terms of people are realising how problematic plastic can be, and they're moving to glass or whatever, or alternatives. And it'll be the same with this, won't it, over time, I would have thought.
Yeah, and I think the challenges move over time, and people's understanding of them. And yeah, I say at the moment for me, big focus is on operational carbon. I think fast forward 5 years' time, once we've moved on to future home standard, everyone's building with heat pumps. The focus will come onto the materials that we're building the houses out of, and a big focus on embodied carbon. And I think, plastic bags. I think people have realised with plastic bags that it was madness, really. But until you've had the step change legislation and forces people to make a change, they don't make that change. And I think sometimes people think regulation is a bad thing, and I think at times it really can just push people to do the right thing. And actually, some of this stuff is relatively easy to do. You just need a bit of a nudge to get over the line to do it. And I think sometimes that has to come from legislation. Sometimes that comes from better products. And if you bring the two together, you really get a real step change. We've seen that with electric vehicles, and I think hopefully we'll see that with homes over the next 5-10 years in the same way we've seen that with electric cars.
And on electric vehicles, not that I want to talk about that, but obviously there was a real skill shortage for people that knew how to do electric vehicles. They're talking that mechanics are going to need to retrain. What's the challenge from a skills perspective in maintenance of these products, refurbishment of these products? Have we got enough skills in the UK market at the moment, or is that something we're also going to have to tackle at some point?
So the skills challenge was one of the reasons Ilke was founded, because there aren't enough qualified tradespeople in the country to build the new homes we need and retrofit the new homes, retrofit the existing homes that we've got. So we do need more people who can fit heat pumps. We do need more people that can fit smart meters. We need more people that can install solar panels and batteries. One of the key things that we've done at the factory is work out how to do that using a different labour pool. As you know, you've recruited sort of 500-600 people in the last 6 months for us, and we've brought people from real change of backgrounds. And I think what's interesting there is can that model be adapted into some of the other tasks? So I know that some of the electrical wholesalers are starting to kit up and pre-wire up some of the components. We now buy our hot water cylinder on a pre-made skid with all the pipework pre-joined up such that it's plug and play. Those sorts of, and that's again happening. We talk about cars, it's happening in the car industry. The car manufacturers don't make the dashboards, they don't make the doors, they assemble pre-made components. And I do think that's something which construction needs to get around, partly from a skills shortage. Is we need some of these things to be much more plug and play, de-skilled, such that the really complex tasks can be done off-site, away from site, and some of the tasks can be done then in a simpler way. And I think that's a journey that we've been on, because we've gone that from the outset. We'll still need bricklayers and joiners and tradespeople to do all sorts of tasks. Our existing stock is a real challenge, but there's certain things, wiring up an inverter and the isolators and switches, that could come on a pre-made board or be fully built into the inverter in the first place, so that it doesn't need to come and be wired up. That's the sort of thing which I think the industry will have to solve if we're going to ramp up some of this stuff. But the skills are out there, they're in short supply, and that's something we need to work out. How can we de-skill some of the processes, but also how can we bring in and upskill more people into the industry? So for me, we're trying to bring additional supply in of people into the industry, but I also think we need to make housing a more attractive career for people to get into. And I think if you are building more sustainable housing, that's a key sort of core part of what you're doing as a business. That attracts people to your business, and I think that's something that the house builders and others are going to have to try and really grapple with. and try and make it a really exciting industry for people to get involved with again. Because I think what we are doing is transformational for people's lives, for the homes and the environment they're creating, they're living in, and the bills, the affordability of their energy and the environment they create is a great job to be doing. And I think if we can sell that to young people and get them excited about the industry, then that's going to help tackle the skills challenges we've got.
I agree. And I think I'm observing, I do a lot of graduate schemes for businesses across the country. And if I was to say a cross section of those people that come to those assessment days, I think like their number one motivator at the moment in a lot of cases is the planet and sustainability. And it used to be money, progression and all these things. And I think there's a different appetite now from the younger generation that are coming through to say, I want to do something to help solve global warming, whatever it is, the crisis that we're currently having in that. And that's interesting. And it's a definite attractor. Is the same attraction there to become a bricklayer? And we've got to do some more around that. But certainly there's better roles available. What have you found around leadership skills? You were an early adopter to all of this stuff, but is there enough people in the marketplace to drive the change that we want to see, i.e. kind of at your level? Because I don't see lots and lots of people that have got the experience that you've got in the market that can go and do this elsewhere.
There are a lot of people out there who've been doing this for quite some time. We clearly need to sort of go tenfold on that to what we need to happen. And that's the same in many sectors. A lot of people in the oil and gas industry have had to reskill into offshore wind farms. But they are doing it. And fundamentally, the process of wiring up a home or wiring up a heat pump are very similar. They're transferable skills. So for me, a lot of this stuff is transferable skills. It's about upskilling people in understanding different technologies, different solutions. Yeah. And from a housing management point of view, if you're looking at housing associations, they've been used to managing change and rolling out programs and working out whether it be component based or area based. And it's the same challenges. I think it's a different set of technologies, different set of solutions, but they are fundamental to the success of the transition that they're on. And I think one of the great things that many organisations have is culturally they're generally, so in the housing association sector, is aligned with what we're trying to achieve. I think that there is a challenge of probably not falling down the same rabbit holes and going wrong in a number of areas. And I think there are people pushing products that may not be the best ones out there for the end consumer or for them longer term. I think they need to probably a lot of interest in learning from each other. I think there is some of that sharing. I think there could be a lot more of that, and that's one of the things that we're looking to do. We're looking to have a session with housing associations down at Octopus's HQ in September to explain what the zero bills is and how it works, because some of them are quite concerned that if a house got a zero bill and another neighbouring house has got £4,000 bill, how does that marry up? And should they be spending the money on that extra money on that house to get it to zero bills when they could be spending that money on other homes and trying to reduce their bills? And I think the discussion there for me is around understanding that it's much more cost effective to do this up front and get the heat pumps and the panels in up front than to have to retrofit them. And there is a financial business case for it now, because it is saving £4,000 a year. That is, if it's shared ownership, the value will be recovered on the shared ownership sales price. And on rental, I think people need to start thinking about homes with zero bills should have a fixed bill of £50 a year or £50 a month, to cover the investment that the housing associations have made, and that would still be miles cheaper than an existing home.
That's a good point.
And use their money in a different way. So I think there's some opportunities to share some learning around that and try and work out what are the good answers that are working for people and try and accelerate their adoption. Because I think although there is good learning and good sharing, the speed of adoption can be slow and without a deadline. And there isn't really a natural deadline for some of this stuff. Mm-hmm. It can be people can say, well, we'll do it next year or next quarter. This is the latest big challenge we've got, and those projects don't quite get to scale. And we saw that with things like the feed-in tariff. When there was a deadline, I remember we were installing 300 solar PV systems at Keep a week in Nottingham. And because there was a deadline, and it really forced the agenda. And I do think we always need to create some artificial deadlines to really drive this agenda and move things forward. At the moment, 2030 still feels quite a long way away, but it isn't. It isn't, and we've got to start motoring on this stuff pretty quickly.
I agree. It's interesting. I met someone yesterday on the podcast, the chief exec of a housing association, and there's a real struggle right now for housing associations of where to spend budget, right? You've got building safety, you've got decarbonisation, you've got build more homes. There's all these narratives out there. It's where you spend the money, right? And it's so difficult. But what have you seen the appetite of housing associations for the product?
So there's a genuine appetite for building in a better way, and I think people are now starting to think that if they don't build it in from the start, they're going to have to retrofit it, and they're looking at the retrofit costs and going, crikey, the retrofit costs are eye-watering, and they are eye-watering costs, and it's a real challenge. There isn't the money isn't there in their budgets to deliver zero carbon and decency and building safety. The money just simply isn't there, and the question is, how do you then make this work financially? But the bit I come back to is, for the last 6 years, we've been building homes that could have been zero carbon. Yeah. Those million homes that have been built in the country all need to be retrofit at a much higher cost.
Yeah.
So building the basics into the housing, the new housing makes sense if you can make it pay for itself through zero bills and some sort of energy charge, through shared ownership sales prices or some sort of energy charge. Then why wouldn't you? And I think that's the bit around. Then it isn't costing you extra money. It's potentially covering its own. It's washing its face, and then you can use your money on your existing stock and focus there, because there has to be a massive priority on existing stock with the costs the way they are. But it shouldn't mean that you can't do stuff on your new build as well.
100%. And while you've mentioned it, and I know this isn't your current focus, but I know it has been previously, retrofit. So I get asked by loads and loads of housing associations, kind of, some of the stock being very old and old terraced house stock, especially in Manchester. And the cost to actually retrofit sometimes would outweigh the value in the property in some cases. Like, what are some of the clever things we can maybe do in the country to try and retrofit some of these properties to get them to are they going to be carbon neutral? I doubt, but to an efficiency level that's acceptable.
So I think this is, and this is a real point of debate, because some of the projects that have been done, the trial projects, people have spent over £100,000 retrofitting a house.
I've heard it.
And in some cases that hasn't delivered, and that's not gone to a zero bill. That's not 20% of the bill. Yeah. So that's gone from a £2,000 bill to a £1,500 bill. And this winter, that'll be a £4,000 bill to a £3,000 bill. So it's not got you to a point of zero bills. What it has done is probably reduced the need for heating a lot. But heating is only once you've done that work, it's probably still only a quarter of the energy bill, and you've got standard charges and electricity use as well. So for me, make use of the money that's available and the technology that stack up. If you can do fabric works, get the basics of loft insulation, draft proofing, cavity wall insulation, etc., the stuff that's low cost and is fundable through things like eco funding, great. The expensive stuff is the floors, the solid walls, the rooms, the roof, that can be tens of thousands of pounds to that work. Some of those properties do need it, but you're not going to fix them this year. And there isn't a payback. It's spending tens of thousands to save hundreds. But there are technologies that do pay back. So I do see some housing associations. I was with Together Group in Blackburn a couple of weeks ago, and they're rolling out solar PV and battery storage systems across their stock. That will make a big difference on bills and funds itself. Now, that's something which therefore can be rolled out at quite a reasonable scale and is fundable. Everyone says fabric first, and I agree, fabric first where you can, but in a lot of the housing association, they've done the double glazing, they've done the loft insulation, they've done the capital walls, and they're on to really expensive stuff, and they've got a lot of the really expensive stuff to do, and they're going to have to work through that over time because they haven't got the budget to do that, and the funding from government isn't there to do it quickly. So, but there are some technologies that do stack up, and so for me, it's making the money you've got and the money you can get stretch as far as you can, as quick as you can, and sometimes that isn't necessarily going with the technologies that you think or everyone says are the best one to go for, which is fabric. Sometimes PV and battery makes sense and does stack up, and you can roll out a program with that. It might be worth doing that in parallel with some of the lower level works. The other thing I would say is there's some real basics of you talked about sort of behavioural stuff of helping people understand how to save money in their home this winter. Basics of and in the summer, in the heat wave, people keeping the curtains closed in the heat wave, but also keeping the curtains closed in winter makes a big difference. Things like the settings on your boiler. Everyone's boiler's set at 80 degrees maximum. The boiler's red hot, and they're operating at efficiency of 80% or 75%. Turn that down to 60 degrees, the house will still be warm and comfortable, and you'll save 15% of your bills.
So true, isn't it? It's so true. And it's an education.
And I did. It's one of the questions I asked when I was over at Together Group. There's a lot of other housing associations. How many? There's a gas safe boiler, a gas safe engineer going to every housing association house once a year to do the gas safety checks, and they could be turning down the flow temperature on the boiler and saving every customer hundreds of pounds this winter, and telling them why they've done it and tell them not to turn it back up again. And simple things like that aren't being done, and that's a bit frustrating. I know there's various people on Twitter and are engaged in this stuff that sort of pulling their hair out saying this is real basics that need to be done, but there are some real basics that people can help themselves with that will make a massive difference this winter. Fundamentally, it's not going to make enough difference because the bills are too high to counter that, and there'll be a huge amount of people in poverty, and that's going to create more of a drain on the revenues of the housing association, because they have to spend that on dealing with the cold and damp and mold and remediating properties that haven't been done. So it's a really difficult situation. But I think the thing is, there are some real simple tips that we can be providing, and using the people that are going into the houses and seeing every house and make them give that advice face to face, and then use the money and the technology that do stack up, and trying to do that as fast as you can.
I think it's incentivizing people as well, isn't it? And I feel like there'll have to be more than just this is good for the planet for some people. You know, like for me, that's enough. But for some people, they'll need more incentivization to do those things, and that's where it gets difficult.
I think this winter the incentive will be there on the prepay meter or wherever it is. It's going to be pretty horrific, and I think that's and fundamentally people will be doing things which they think are good for their health to try and keep the house warm, but that might be blocking up air vents and turning off things that are fundamental to their health as well, and that's the bit that's concerning. So some really clear messaging needs to come out, I think, before this winter. And that's a real challenge for the housing associations, and they should be treating it the same way they treat COVID, I think.
When's is it October when the new electric prices and energy prices come out?
So it'll be towards the end of this month. They'll announce the October price rise. That's going to go up and almost double the rates, which were almost double the rates before. So typically it was £1,000 a year bill, and then they'll go up again in January as well. So we're talking potentially up almost £4,000 average bill in January, and that's the average. You think there's as many people above that as there is below that. So you've got, I think, the 75th percentile, so sort of a quarter of homes have bills nearly pushing £6,000 if they were to adequately heat the home, and clearly they're not going to be able to. So a real challenge there, and that's what drove me into getting into this space in the first place. And I think that's what drives a lot of people is the carbon point of view, but also the energy and the poverty side of it as well. And hopefully that challenge is enough to drive people to say, look, if you want to make a real difference to people's lives, you can do that in housing as much as you would do in healthcare or in the charitable
100%.
sector.
Well, it's so relevant.
A great industry to get involved with, and there are a load of great organisations want to do great work in this space, and that's the opportunity that's ahead of us, and that's the challenge that I'm excited by and driven by every day, and that's what hopefully other people will be as well.
Yeah, and I'm not expecting you to solve the energy prices here, but is there a solution, or do you see anything down the road that's going to reduce some of this inflationary cost and reduce some of these energy bills, or are we on the ladder now of just constant rises in electricity and energy?
It should be a blip, and prices should come back to a level closer to where they were, because it hasn't cost any more to get the gas out of the ground. Fundamentally, gas used to cost what used to be 40p a therm. It's now 400p a therm, so sort of 4p a kilowatt hour. So it hasn't cost any more to get out of the ground. The challenge is supply and demand, and Russia and everything that's happened in Ukraine. So fundamentally, if whatever happens in Ukraine, and the sooner that happens, finishes, the better. Hopefully a positive outcome for the Ukrainians. Then hopefully we'll move back to something approaching something more sensible again. But I don't think we'll be back at £1,000 a year bills. We might be back at £2,000 a year bills in a year or two's time, and hopefully we'll be back at that, because it's not sustainable to stay at these levels. But fundamentally, the cost of getting gas out of the ground hasn't changed, but also the fundamentals of nuclear power, offshore wind, solar panels hasn't changed either, and they are now massively cheaper, and we should be rolling that out as fast as we can. And fundamentally, they will bring out a price point of electricity which is cheaper. And this is what's come back to the way the zero bills works is when it's you get times today where the cost of electricity is 100 times what it is because there's no wind and there's no solar and we're having to import energy from Europe. That's when cost is really, really high. But you also get times when it's really windy and there's not much demand and the cost of energy is negative, and you get paid to use energy on these tariffs. So that's where, if we're smart around our usage and we can use things like batteries and charge electric vehicle at night, that's when you can get to actually, the average cost might be £2,000 a year, but if you're smart with your energy usage, you can bring bills down further.
Yeah.
And the challenge there is, how do you make that happen in the housing association sector, where there isn't you haven't got someone like me who's into their tech and there's monitoring.
Exactly.
So how do you de-skill that? And that's what we're trying to do with the zero bills, is say, for you and consumer, you manage your bills and use your energy as you do, and we'll do that in the background, and we'll do that for you to really minimise your cost. And we'll spread that over the year. That's the other thing is, this winter, potentially I looked at this morning, you potentially got £20 a day bills, not a week or a month, a day in winter in a 75th percentile house, because in winter you've got high gas need because it's cold. That's and that's crazy, isn't it? People haven't got that money, and that's where, if we can, there is hopefully that will come down. There is stuff we could do to. So currently the cost of electricity is dictated by the cost of gas. The government could relatively quickly change that in the next 12 months or so, such that the cost of electricity for renewables is set differently to that for gas. We still need that gas at times, and that will be more expensive. But over the year, we can probably hopefully in a year's time, we'll have de-linked the two, and that will help bring bills down and keep it at a consistent level. Probably higher than we'd like, but not as high as it's going to be this winter. I think this winter's pretty horrific.
Yeah. And last couple of things for me, and I agree totally with what you said, but if you just mentioned the government, if you had one decision you could make as the leader of government currently, what would you do to really promote and really get us moving in this agenda of sustainable living? I
think people now are sort of fully on board with the vision of what generally fully on board with the vision of what we're trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. I think the bit for me is really lining stuff up so everything's lined up to try and help people move in the right direction, and that's easy and it's the obvious choice for them to do, and some of that isn't all the cost of gas versus the cost of electricity. If we remove some of these issues around the electricity cost, that will bring the cost of electricity down. That make heat pumps make a lot more sense, and make electric vehicles make more sense. So there's some of these things are real win-wins, and I think that's one of the things is really helping line a lot of these things up. And I think the other key piece is so some of the joined up stuff in the regulations and lining up, and then probably not pulling the rug out of stuff. So as soon as they pull the rug out of government programs, it destroys the confidence in the industry. We had that with solar panels, with heat pumps, and with insulation schemes. And I'm slightly nervous that it might pull the rug out of some of these heat pump programs for retrofit now. And if that happens, that would be a real disaster. So that's one of the bits for me that I'm hopeful that we keep some continuity of what we're trying to achieve, and that'll help move everything there. But I think broadly we are moving in that right direction now. How quickly we get there, and the more we can do to accelerate that, the better. And that's really what everyone I think should be really focused on is how do we make this stuff happen faster? We know we've got to do it. How do we work out how to pay for it? How do we encourage people to want to do it? And the more we can show people the positive stories around that and share that, the better. So
I agree.
Zero Bills Homes, using them as advocates for saying that this, and making it real, making it feel real, and showing people it can be done. And that's obviously what inspires me is seeing what other people have done in other industries. Other people, what they've done, and if we can try and inspire people to do the same in housing, then hopefully that ripple effect across the industry, and that's what needs to happen. Fundamentally, we're not going to solve it on our own at Ilke, but we can hopefully lead the way and show people what can happen, and hopefully that will then ripple out across the industry, and everyone will start to adopt it. So that's the challenge for me, is industry lining up, the government lining up behind it, and then really trying to show what can be done, and then hopefully everyone else will follow along faster.
Yeah, and final thing, and you pretty much just covered it, but just the final thing for me is I'm biased in this, but I think Ilke are leading the way in some of this stuff, and generally I'm seeing the scale and size and speed that we're doing it at. What's the future look like for Ilke and like your role in this, and kind of how much further could we take it? If you put your blue sky cap on and said, this is where I'd like to see the industry, what does that look like for Ilke?
It's hard to visualize, I think, because I look back at what we thought we could do 5 years ago and see where we are now, and have huge pride in what we've achieved. And I think that's one of the things is that classic, I think Bill Gates quote, you always overestimate what you can do in 2 years, underestimate what you can do in 10. And I think where could we be in 10 years time, I think we can really be setting the bar for the whole global construction of housing in terms of the quality, the speed, the cost, the performance of housing. And I think we're on that journey to be able to set the bar at a new level. And I don't know quite what that new level will be. What we thought we would try and achieve by 2030, I think we'll probably achieve sooner. And what we end up achieving in 2030 could be something completely different. I've got a long list of exciting things to try and work on and make real. And what's great about working at Ilke is some of that stuff which I thought was probably 5 or 6 years away, we're starting to work on now and could be happening next year. And that's fantastic for me. And I do think we're moving to a world which is we'll need traditional housing to continue. We need to help traditional housing build better. But I do think there'll be a massive role for modular going forward. And I think modular can help set a completely new standard of performance and expectations from housing. And that's what I'd like to hope in 10 years' time. People think they see an Ilke modular house as the most desirable property to buy. And that could be for a whole host of reasons of what we do. I'm quite excited about what they might be. But there's lots of interesting ideas on the whiteboard that we've got chalked up to try and make happen, and some of those will work and some of them won't. But that's part of it is finding what it is. But I'm quite excited about where that could lead us to, and hoping that we can continue to drive that journey all the way through. But we'll be a part of the story, and for me, success for me is a success at Ilke, but also success across the industry and having helping to transform the whole industry in the UK and hopefully globally as well. We've had a lot of interest on the zero bill stuff from overseas as well, and that's great to see as well. If we can inspire people elsewhere to do it, then that's part of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, amazing, and a lovely way to wrap up. Thank you for taking the time out. Honestly, I could talk to you for another 3 hours, but I think what we'll do is we'll get you back on in a couple of years and see if you did do some of the things that you said you might be able to do. But if people do want to reach out and connect with you, best place LinkedIn or email, or what's the best thing? I'll put it in the show notes. So
I'm on Twitter, at Nigel Banks _Ilke, and on LinkedIn as well. Fairly active on those. If housing association are interested in zero bills or any clients, then definitely do get in touch. So we've got a session in September with housing associations down at Octopus's HQ and R&D Centre, which will be hopefully really exciting for them and for us to share what we're doing and try and see how we make this happen faster. So do get in touch if you're interested.
Amazing. Cheers, Nigel.
Thanks a lot.